Hello there, I'm Amira David. This is Boom Bust, and these are the stories we are tracking for you today. Well, a new UK poll shows more Britons want out of the EU than those who want to stay in. Plus, the U.S. Labor Department reports slower job growth as the unemployment rate ticks down to its lowest in 8 years. I've got the details on all of that coming right up. Then Lynn Paramore is on the show. She'll tell me what she thinks is driving wealth inequality and what can be done to reverse the trend. Plus, Manuel Rapolo will be my guest in today's Big Deal. In the latest Democratic debate, the candidates went head-to-head over the TPP and Wall Street's undue influence in politics. We've got all of that coming right up. Don't go anywhere. Boom Bust starts right now. Well, the idea of a Brexit, a British exit from the EU, is still very much on the table, at least according to one survey that found almost half of its respondents would prefer to leave the EU than stay in it. The poll was done by international market research firm YouGov, and it found that 45% of its respondents supported Brexit, while 36% were against it. 18%, mind you, were undecided. The reason why this poll is pivotal is because it was conducted just 2 days after the publication of a deal that was negotiated between Prime Minister David Cameron and European Council President Donald Tusk. The deal outlined a number of changes the EU was willing to implement in order to make UK membership in the politico-economic union a little more appealing. The proposal includes a 4-year emergency break on welfare payments for EU migrant workers and a quote-unquote red card system that would give national parliaments more power. But while Cameron says it may be enough for him to campaign to stay within the EU, it's been unclear how Britons feel about it. And at least in this particular survey, the out camp is 9 points ahead of the in camp. But analysts are quick to point out that with nearly 20% of the respondents undecided, there's still ample room for public opinion to shift one way or the other. All right, moving right along here to news out of the U.S. economy. Job growth slowed in the month of January, with the Labor Department reporting 151,000 jobs added. That's below the 190,000 that were anticipated. Now, some analysts say they expected job growth to slow down in the wake of a blockbuster fourth quarter that saw the economy add an average of 279,000 jobs every month. That kind of growth, they said, was simply not sustainable. Others, of course, are raising concerns that the global slowdown may finally be showing signs that it's eating away at business confidence, thereby undermining hiring. But even though the jobs number was weaker than expected, there are a couple of bright spots in the report, including data that now shows a 2.5% increase in wages over the past year took place, and also that the unemployment rate has dipped down to 4.9%. That's the lowest we've seen it at in 8 years. So all in all, we're looking at a pretty mixed report here, though most analysts believe this is likely strong enough to keep the Fed's eye on March for the next rate hike. All right, well, Volkswagen is still in deep water for its diesel emissions scandal. So deep, in fact, that the company announced today it's delaying its annual earnings report. The report is scheduled to come out March 10th, but with so many unanswered questions as to how much its cheating scandal will cost the company, Volkswagen has actually decided to postpone it. And now joining me right here with us on set is Simone Del Rosario. Simone, it's so good to have you on.
Good to be
here. So
let's
talk about this. Suspending these, releasing ratings. What are analysts saying about this decision?
Well, some analysts are saying, this is a really unusual move. Other analysts say, look, companies suspend ratings or reports when they need to, but usually it's definitely a red flag. Most analysts here are saying it's unusual, but then again, so is cheating at the level that
Right,
Volkswagen
exactly.
cheated, that made this international scandal. You know, they don't know. It's really complicated, the fallout here. So unusual, but probably understandable for what they're going through. In releasing these reports, though, they're kind of saying they don't know what the bottom line of this fallout is. You know, VW has already set aside $7.5 billion to repair the 11 million cars that they recalled because of this. But last month, the Department of Justice sued the company for $48 billion in fines because of the violations of U.S. pollution regulations. Will they get $48 billion? Of course not. They're going to settle for a number much lower than that. But that uncertainty is part of why they want to wait on releasing these reports. So there's another caveat that we don't know about as well, and that is that Volkswagen has not been able to come up with a plan that satisfies U.S. regulators to be able to fix these cars. If they can't do that, Volkswagen's going to actually have to buy back every single diesel car that is involved in this recall in the U.S. So many unanswered questions here. They may really need this time to figure out what's going on before they can release the report.
We don't know the extent of the damages, but we have known about this cheating scandal since September. So we're talking about 5 months. A lot has happened since. I mean, they've just been, we were talking about this earlier, they've been in damage control mode. Tell us about the fallout we've seen, really.
Absolutely. What always strikes me about this scandal is how long this story was just begging to come out. And it was all thanks to this unassuming engineer over at West Virginia University, Daniel Carter. In the spring of 2014, the spring semester, he just had a team, a research professor, 2 grad students, a faculty member, and they took a $50,000 grant and looked at these emissions. They were driving these cars up and down the West Coast, and the level of emissions that they were seeing were so much different than what U.S. regulators had. Initially, Carter thought that their results were wrong, but really eventually government agencies said this is what really blew the lid on this.
Wow.
Of course, it took a year and a half before media headlines found out about this, and that's when the EPA came out in September, said that VW had cheated. Within days, they were suspending sales of the 2.0-liter diesels. The CEO stepped down, 10 days later, they finally admitted guilt, recalled 11 million cars, then suspended more cars. Even though they said that it was only those 2.0-liter diesels, they expanded it to 3.0-liter diesels. And then, of course, this lawsuit in January from the Department of Justice. So really quite a roller coaster for this company.
My goodness. Now, before it all went down, VW had the goal of being the biggest, car company ever by the year 2018, I think. And they really were sort of on the up and up. But this has truly slowed them down. I mean, tell us a little bit more about what we can expect ahead for them.
Well, when you announce that you're going to be delaying the release of your report because of this scandal, you would think that that would affect the markets. In fact, it didn't today. Stock shares were up more than 2%, which actually surprised me a little bit.
Very interesting.
But if you take a look at the last 6 months, you can see specifically where the scandal broke there in September. You see that big dip down when the stock dive bombed. But a lot of analysts are saying, if all the bad news is out there, things may actually be looking up.
It may just be that they were delaying the pain, and that's why the stocks were up, because people are thinking, oh, well, not bad yet. We'll just wait until it completely goes off the cliff. That could be it.
It might not be off the cliff, though. I mean, people are saying things are looking up for them. So, 1 in 9 cars worldwide are Volkswagen family cars, so they have a lot going for them.
Absolutely. Really interesting story. I'm glad to get an update. Simone Del Rosario, thank you so much for that reporting. Appreciate it. All right. Although the student debt crisis in the U.S. is finally getting some attention as we enter an election year, the problem does keep growing. In fact, the total student debt grows by $2,000 every second, and it's putting the millennial generation in the red. Boomba's Bianca Fascini has the details.
The total amount of U.S. student debt has reached $1.3 trillion. The average sum is near $28,000, but there's plenty who owe much more than that. After hearing those numbers, it's not hard to understand how crippling the financial burden on students can be. Part of the reason we're hearing more about it is because it's election season, and some candidates have promised to make it a priority. But another reason is because of its impact on certain elements of the U.S. economy.
State support for education has eroded, and what's happened is we've replaced that with increases in tuition, and that's really hurt kids from lower-income, middle-class homes.
For young Americans saddled in debt, that monthly loan payment takes precedent over other investments, like home ownership. Though there was a recent uptick in the current rate, U.S. home ownership is still near a record low. The same goes for car ownership. From 2008 to 2014, the amount of teenagers getting their driver's license dropped by 6.6%. Now, it's important to note that this can't all be blamed on student debt. Some of it's the result of other factors, like the long-term effects of the recession. But when coupled with those long-term effects, like stagnant wages, the situation becomes dire. High student debt bills, high rent prices, and low wages make it difficult to put a down payment on anything, let alone put money aside to start a family.
The demand of families, the children especially, but their parents too, is for a college education, but the wage doesn't permit you to buy it. The solution, you borrow for it.
One of the biggest points of criticism in the student loan dilemma are interest rates, which have reached as high as 8.5%. So forget just paying the principal amount. It's the interest and late fees that are making it even more difficult. As the crisis has worsened, the debate over how to handle it has become more heated. The proposals range from making college free to seeing no problem with the way the current system is set up. Perhaps what's most concerning, though, is the lack of action from students, especially compared to other countries. With the exception of a handful of protests, American students haven't fought tuition increases or interest rate hikes like their international counterparts have. And you can bet that some schools and banks hope it stays that way. Reporting in Washington, Bianca Ficini, RT.
Time for a quick break, but stick around because when we return, Lynn Paramore is on the show. She'll tell me what she thinks is driving wealth inequality and how it might even explain low wage growth in the U.S. Then in today's Big Deal, Manuel Rapallo and I are talking about Thursday's Democratic presidential debate. The candidates went head-to-head on everything from Wall Street ties to the TPP, and we'll break it down on the other side. Stay with us. And as we go to break, here are the closing numbers at the bell.
I don't prejudge anything.
I listen to you every morning.
Hello, this is Larry King.
I wouldn't lie to you.
Oh, I wanted to do this when I was 6 years old.
I will always be grateful to you, Larry.
It was in my blood from the start.
I don't have an agenda.
And you allowed me to come on your show and clear my name up.
Being interviewed by you is like taking a ride in the passenger seat with Richard Petty.
I didn't have a lot of people I could talk to. You let me sit down with you and talk.
I'll just ask questions.
NATO's violent overthrow of the Libyan regime in 2011 created a failed state and provided an opening for such groups as ISIL. 5 years later, the Pentagon is considering another intervention into this very unfortunate country.
You're watching an RT America special report.
Man, it ain't about him. It's about you. It's about me. It's about everybody.
Basically, everything that you think you know about civil society has broken down.
There's always going to be somebody else one step ahead of the game.
We should not be in the business of normalizing violence.
We don't need people that think like this on our planet.
This is an incredibly tense situation.
Well, we all know that income and wealth inequality has been a hot button issue amongst politicians, Republicans and Democrats alike, all across the world. But the debate also exists between economists who are trying to find the root causes of this. To continue that discussion, Lynn Paramore is on the show. She's a columnist for Reuters, Al Jazeera America, and Huffington Post, and she's taking a look at what different economists and researchers have had to say about the issue. Some, like Joseph Stiglitz, believe property prices are a leading cause, while others believe it's merely a symptom. So I first asked if this disagreement asked her to talk about the divide between the economists. Take a look.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate that's going on, and, not being an economist myself, I can't weigh in too much in the nitty-gritty of the technical details, but I can tell you that the debate as to what's driving it has divided economists like Joseph Stiglitz from one like Lance Taylor, who I just mentioned. Now, Joseph Stiglitz would say that real estate is a causal factor in inequality, where an economist like Taylor would say, no, it's not a cause, it's just a result. Now, you could look at a place like Manhattan, which is where I am now, and you can see there are all kinds of high-rise buildings going up that newly minted gazillionaires have been buying, and it sort of looks like there's a lot of real estate activity going on. And sure enough, you'll find ordinary people or middle-class people priced out of neighborhoods because of all this buying power that the rich have and all these apartment buildings and things that they're snapping up. Now, that certainly drives a certain amount of inequality, so I think that that Professor Stiglitz, you can see his point. But I'm also inclined to take Taylor's point that that may just be the case in big cities like Manhattan, or places like Los Angeles. But if there's inequality going on in parts of the country where there's not a real estate boom, it sort of looks like there must be something else at work. So I am sympathetic to Taylor's argument that indeed, it may be things like the taxation and the executive compensation, things like that are more driving this perhaps more than real estate. But, they're going to have to battle this out. The question is not completely answered yet.
Right. I mean, there's a good argument sort of to be made on both sides of the coin. Now, in your writings, you've pointed out an interesting distinction for what happened really in the 20 years before 2007 and the years since leading up until today, particularly as it relates to borrowing and saving. Can you break down the difference in that behavior and why 2007 was the point in time where it sort of changed?
Well, unfortunately, for a couple of decades leading up to the Great Recession, ordinary people who were earning wages had suffered flat wages, right? The productivity was going up, and they weren't being compensated for it. And again, I think that has to do with the weakening of collective bargaining, and also the outsourcing was happening. So their wages were not going up, and they were having to borrow and use their credit cards and so on in order to maintain their lifestyle. And when I say maintain their lifestyle, I don't mean that they were going out and blowing this money on fancy cars. This was really to do things like send their kids to school or to buy health care, not extravagant expenditures, but just to sort of maintain a decent quality of life or, fund their retirement. And so that kind of borrowing, eventually it becomes, it gets very out of balance in the economy. And we begin to have a credit-driven economy. And now on the other side of the coin, the wealthy are able to save more and more because they are being taxed very lightly. And so their wealth is piling up, and the return on their investments is sort of higher, for sure, than the rate in which a worker is seeing his or her paycheck increase, which is often not at all. And so that begins to really increase that divide between the wealthy and the rest of us. And unfortunately, the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, kind of blew up and exposed this problem, because suddenly, when the banking system, was in such dire straits, people lost their jobs, and people, had to go on unemployment. Their retirements, got eaten up. They lost their houses, or their mortgages were underwater. And suddenly there was no way to borrow any more money, right? They, the banks cut off lending, and so the problem was really exposed. And we didn't have people out on the street to the point that we did during the Great Depression, but that's only because really we had learned a few lessons from the Great Depression, and we did have things like unemployment insurance to kind of, soften the blow. But these problems have not really been solved. I mean, the gap between the rich and the rest is still growing, and we're in a very fragile place, I believe. It's very dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely, with a lot of people saying it's just getting worse. But tell me, I mean, does that theory really explain why wages aren't growing today? I mean, here we are with corporations that are hiring, as far as I can see. I mean, we've got strong job numbers. Unemployment is ticking down, yet I still keep reading the same headline over and over that says U.S. economy expands as wages stay flat. I mean, what gives?
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's the fact that workers don't have collective bargaining power. And when I say that, what I'm really saying is they're not able to win, certain rights to job security, and so the question is they may be getting jobs right now, but what kind of jobs? They're not jobs, for example, that allow them to have a very high quality of life. They might not have sick leave. They might not have health care benefits. You might call them McJobs. They may be part-time jobs. And, so many people that I talk to in New York City, just in my field, which is, sort of journalism, live every day going to work thinking it could be their last day of work. There's no job security whatsoever. So, not only are the wages flat, but the jobs are very insecure, and it creates, how are you supposed to plan for the future under those circumstances? You can't save money. You're always afraid of the shoe that's going to drop. How do you fund a child's education, much less your own retirement?
Right.
So it's a bad state of affairs, I'm afraid.
Yeah, you're living day to day, unfortunately. I want to ask you about the optics of this debate, because oftentimes you'll read a headline like this one in the New York Times that I'm going to pull up that says, quote, inequality has not risen since the financial crisis. And you think, great, then what is everyone making a fuss about? But then you realize the article is actually referring to income inequality, not wealth inequality. First of all, is that a common misunderstanding? And does it play a role, do you think, in how the debate is shaped?
Yes, I do. These things often get lumped together, and they're not the same. Just in very basic terms, income is, it's your salary. It's the flow of money that's coming to you, say, over the course of a year. Wealth is something different. Wealth is your assets, what you own. And I could take a snapshot of what you own right now and tell you how wealthy you are. But the tricky thing about wealth is it's easy to hide, and you see people in the upper income strata doing very fancy things to hide their wealth, to park it places where
right.
Government officials can't tell where it's going. And so there's a little bit of secrecy going on, and it's kind of difficult to place numbers as accurately on wealth as it is income.
All right, it's big deal time. I'm sitting here with the one and only Manuel Rapalo. We're talking about big money and big influence. That was certainly the biggest theme of Thursday's Democratic presidential debate. Frontrunners Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton engaged in a tense back and forth from the start on matters ranging from campaign finance to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Take a listen.
I think it's time to end the very artful smear that you and your campaign have been carrying out in recent weeks. And let's talk about the issues. Let's talk about the issues that divide us.
Okay, let's talk
we
about
both
issues.
agree with campaign finance reform.
Let's talk about issues.
I worked hard for McCain-Feingold. I want to reverse Citizens United.
Let's talk about issues.
Let's talk about issues.
Let's talk about issues.
Let's talk about the issues, Manny.
Ooh,
yeah, that was probably the pivotal moment. That was the moment that was really circulating on social media right there, and that was sort of the tenseness that we saw the whole way through. But let's start with the TPP, because we talked about the TPP yesterday. We know that it was signed yesterday by all the member states in Auckland, New Zealand. It has been an issue in the platform of both of these candidates. Did they address it last night?
Absolutely, and rightfully so. The deal was just signed this week. It's now in the ratification stage. It's got there's 2 years for the parliaments of each country involved to sign this treaty. What's really interesting about TPP discussion last night is Hillary's answer. I don't want to get too ahead of myself because I want to play this clip, but Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, she advocated for TPP even before the negotiations were finalized. So let's take a listen to what Hillary Clinton said when she was asked about her position on TPP.
I did hope that the TPP negotiated by this administration would put to rest a lot of the concerns that many people have expressed about trade agreements. And I said that I was holding out that hope that it would be the kind of trade agreement that I was looking for. I waited until it had actually been negotiated because I did want to give the benefit of the doubt to the administration. Once I saw what the outcome was, I opposed it.
Wow, she really tried to walk out of that one.
Right, but what's interesting about what she's saying is that she waited till the negotiations were over, she reserved her judgment till she saw the text, and once she saw it, she opposed it. That's not entirely true. I'm not calling Secretary Clinton a liar, but at the very best, that statement's only half true. I'll read to you what she said in 2012 in Australia, at one of the TPP, Australia being one of the TPP countries. These are her words. She said, this Trans-Pacific Partnership sets the gold standard in trade agreements to open free, transparent, fair trade, the kind of environment that has the rule of law and a level playing field. She's adding that this would cover 40% of the world's total trade and build in strong protections for workers and the environment. This was 4 years ago, with the trade deal still being negotiated, where concerns were coming up over the potential damage that this could have for American jobs, the potential damage that this could have access to pharmaceuticals, and that sort of thing. So it's interesting that
it is.
You know,
and less than 4 years ago, she wrote about it, as far as I understand, in her book Hard Choices.
Right, she has the right to change her mind. Of course, it just doesn't. I think it doesn't settle well with most people to hear her not be clear on why she supported it then and exactly what changed her mind to the point where she doesn't support it anymore.
Yeah, well, it's tougher when she's going up against someone like Bernie Sanders, who's been clear from the get-go on where he stands on that issue. But let's talk about something else, because you know, we alluded to it earlier. The tension, really, that moment that we saw earlier, really had to do with Hillary Clinton's Wall Street ties, her alleged Wall Street ties. And, you know, tell me about that back and forth. How did it really play out? Right. I think that happened early on in the debate, and it really was obviously the sticking point here. Let's play a clip of Hillary Clinton talking about those ties when she was asked about the money that she received from Goldman Sachs just for speaking.
I think I may not have done the job I should in explaining my record. You know, I did when I left the Secretary of State's office, like so many former officials, military leaders, journalists, others. I did go on the speaking circuit. I spoke to heart doctors. I spoke to the American Camping Association. I spoke to auto dealers. And yes, I spoke to firms on Wall Street. They wanted me to talk about the world, what my experience had been as Secretary of State. So what we're hearing, Hillary Clinton, it's kind of a weird answer to her ties to Wall Street, to taking money. Look, if it was me and I was being offered almost $700,000 to do speaking tours, I believe the actual number was $675,000 from Goldman Sachs. She was just leaving the State Department. It's kind of a hard thing, but
a lot of politicians do it. We know this happens.
Right, but we have to, I think, as an American people, question what that means when a politician is taking money from Wall Street, at the same time trying to appear tough on regulations and really holding them accountable, like Bernie Sanders.
The question always is, does that money translate to votes? Does it present undue influence on how they make their decisions? And that's what it really comes down to. Manny Rapolo, thanks so much for weighing in on that. We love hearing from you guys. Tweet at all of us, Bianca Bashini, Simone Reports, Manuel_Rapolo, Amira David. And remember, you can see all the segments featured on YouTube, youtube.com/BoomBustRT. We'll see you next time.